audience. Welcome to our international stage at this year's eIDAS Summit. I'm happy to have you here and to moderate the stage. And before I hand over to our first speaker here on stage, I would like to introduce myself and to give some general remarks. My name is Esther Steverding. I work for Bitkom in Brussels and on digital policies on the European level. In Brussels, we monitor the European developments and spread the word about Bitkom priorities and positions. With it, we monitor, among other things, of course, the recent developments on the eIDAS file. Bitkom and its members are quite active on this very important file, and I can, of course, recommend to everyone to have a look into our position on this file. The fact that I'm covering eIDAS might be one of the reasons which qualified me to be your host here in the afternoon, but it's an honor for me to do so. I encourage you and invite you to use the chat here in the Zoom room to post questions and comments, and just let's get into an exchange. And of course, if you want to discuss our topic on social media, please use the hashtag eIDAS23. Additionally, all sessions get recorded and will be on YouTube very soon. Having said this, I will now turn my and your attention to our phenomenal lineup, and with it to the reasons why you are listening to this stage. Our first speaker is Caroline Copley. Caroline will present the UK's digital identity strategy, and afterwards at around 1 p.m., David Soyton and Alicia Escriba from Google will take over the stage and will give us some insights on the digital identity on Android. After David and Alicia left the stage, Slavomir Gorniak from ENISA takes the chance to speak to us and presents the EUDI wallet certification at 1:30. Magila Biron from Nitro entered the stage at around 2 p.m. and delivers a keynote on the importance of identity in e-signatures. And before the final curtain falls, Philip Hohenberg from Seal ID gives us a glimpse into the future of eIDAS from a Swedish perspective. All will give a brief presentation and remain open for questions afterwards. So please use the chat, write down thoughts and comments, but please only the ones which relate to the topic. And if you want to discuss the topics from the international stage on social media, please do so by using the hashtag eIDAS23. These are the remarks from my side, and I will now open this international stage content-wise. Caroline Copley, may I ask you to join, and you already joined, so welcome here on stage, and let me shortly introduce you to our audience. Caroline is the head of Digital Identity Strategy in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. Her current challenge is to create the legal basis for a secure and trusted digital identity ecosystem in the UK, which is ready to do business with digital identity systems in other countries. So it sounds very interesting, and we are really looking forward to your presentation. I would like you to invite here on stage. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Esther, and hello. I'm delighted to be here. Being a Zoom call, of course, I can't look at your faces, but that's absolutely fine. You can hopefully see what you need to see of me and can all hear me very well. It is a great pleasure and a privilege to be able to talk to you as an item on your agenda about the UK's digital identity strategy. Moving to a world where digital identities are widely trusted as secure and enabling offers huge potential benefits to individuals and businesses. But it also comes with challenges that governments and businesses must take responsibility to address. So I'm here to talk to you today about the approach of just one government, and I can see that Bitkom has put together a programme that is going to enable you to hear from other parties as well in the course of the day. For us in the UK, like all countries, our approach is rooted in our history and our culture, in particular the strong British attachment to privacy and civil liberties. It also grows from our general unfamiliarity with ID cards. The UK has only actually had 2 brief experiences of organised identity management in its history. So how do we think about digital identity in the UK today? It's not packaged up with any concept of a centralised identity basis. For us, digital identity is just an electronic representation of who you are and or what you're able to do. It lets you prove who you are during interactions and transactions without the need for physical documents. And that can be convenient, maybe more cost effective and safer than physical documents. Why, you may ask, are we focusing on digital identities now? Because digital identity technology already exists in the UK, as it does elsewhere, but that those technologies in the UK aren't standardized, they aren't inclusive, they aren't trusted or permitted by law. And yet it's quite clear already that digital identities would make a range of economically critical practices more efficient and cheaper for individuals and businesses, things like getting a job, renting or buying property, or opening a bank account. Done well, digital identities also can reduce data leakage, safeguard privacy, and improve people's access to services. In fact, in the UK, we did some market analysis across just 4 sectors: recruitment, travel, conveyancing, and financial services. And we it was calculated that annual savings for industry in the UK would be at least £800 million per year. So that felt worth paying some attention to. We did a lot of engagement with members of the public and industry before we in the British government started our digital identity programme, and that led us to take a cautious approach. So our approach in the UK fundamentally is that we're not mandating how digital identities will happen. We're simply working to make sure that when and where they do happen, they are safe and secure. So I'll just put a few visuals up to help you understand, because it's nice to look at some pictures sometimes. So this first slide sets out the key principles that define our approach to enabling digital identities in the UK, starting with this really central point that digital identities for us are not a digital representation of a national or centralised ID card, because we don't have one of those at the moment. Our approach is outcome driven. So the British government isn't trying to engineer a whole new system single-handedly. The commitment that we made to industry and to individuals was that we would do only what governments can do, and we'd let industry experts do what they're good at. And this applies particularly to technology. Our system is rigorously and consistently technology agnostic, in recognition that tech is evolving all the time. We're also trying to focus, this is the middle point, on bringing best practice together. So a key principle for us is that we are not trying in the UK to reinvent the wheel by creating new digital identity standards that are specific to the UK. Our aim is to create a stable framework for the UK market from standards that already are widely recognised. And the bit at the bottom is sort of encapsulating this idea that we're not saying that we have all the answers right now. Our framework is being built to evolve, not as a static structure. And we have plans in place to continue the extensive stakeholder engagement that we've been doing for the last 3 years, and continue that into the future so we can keep benefiting from industry expertise. So this slide shows you the 4 foundation stones for the digital identity ecosystem. These are the enablers for the UK market development as we see it. So first of all, we need a public face for digital identities in the UK, because nothing exists at the moment, and we will, after legislation, be setting up an office for digital identities and attributes. It won't be a regulator, because we're not mandating that everybody has to have a digital identity or imposing regulation. it will just be a public face which will own and keep up to date the second foundation stone of our system, the UK Digital Identity and Attributes Trust Framework, which sets the standards for what a good digital identity looks like in the UK. And the Office for Digital Identities and Attributes will also own and oversee the certification scheme that will be used to assess organisations, identity service providers, and so on, that want to be part of the trusted ecosystem. And that whole activity will be underpinned by legislation. So we thought hard about what was the minimum amount of legislation that was needed, and the measures that we've come up with are that minimum to provide a basis to bring trust and confidence in the whole ecosystem. And also, importantly, because we recognise that without a national identity card, people do need to trust their identities, and those identities need to be based on the most trusted data. And that is data that is held by government departments, after all, in the Passport Office, the Tax Office, and so on. So legislation is needed in the UK to create a legal gateway for public authorities to share information about people with their consent with private sector organisations for the purposes of identity checking. So those are the 4 foundation stones of the UK ecosystem, and they're also foundational for enabling digital identities to work across borders as well. So this is how we are planning to build what we are doing and move out into the rest of the world, recognising that we need a secure and accessible UK digital identity ecosystem to start the work of linking up with other countries' digital identity systems. And we've integrated international interoperability into our planning from the outset, because the ultimate goal for everybody interested in this vision must be for businesses and individuals to be able to engage more easily and securely with the global digital economy, for people from Britain to be able to travel overseas with confidence, with a usable digital identity, and for us in the UK to be able to welcome other nationals and know that we can recognise and trust their digital identities. But there's loads of work that needs to underpin reaching that sweet spot. And what I'll show you on the next 2 slides are the 2 specific ways in which we are preparing for international interoperability right now. So it comes to the trust framework and the certification framework. The trust framework is a document that you can already see on the UK government website. And we have developed the trust framework over the last 3 years with an eye on international standards, guidance, and privacy frameworks. So this has been about taking best practice from existing international bodies of expertise, which means that we're avoiding creating new hoops for industry to jump through. And the same goes with our certification scheme. This also relies on international standards. It's been designed around a particular standard from the ISO, the International Standards Organization, that is used to assess and certify quality in products, processes and services in lots and lots of different sectors already. And what we end up with, this diagram on the the right of your screen, hopefully I've got that the right way around, is you can see this flow down from the International Accreditation Forum, which sits above the UK's National Accreditation Service. UCAS has accredited 5 certification bodies who are operating in the UK now. And they have the role of certifying organisations and entities that want to come forward and be trusted as trusted identity service providers within the UK system. So already 40 such organisations have been certified just over the last 9 months. It's a massive piece of work that's going on and is continuing. And these certified bodies, when we have our legislation in place, will have their names on a secure public register, and they will be able to use a secure trust mark, all to show that they're part of this trusted ecosystem that's going to be overseen by the new Office for Digital Identities and Attributes. And the outcome of all that is that we're going to end up with a framework that's based on internationally recognised standards and internationally recognised systems for assurance and compliance. And this will mean the UK is ready to connect to its digital identity architecture to the rest of the world. So I've just got one more slide and then I can stop and answer questions, do some chatting, whatever you like. So I thought it'd just be helpful to let you know where we are now in our programme, because we live in exciting times and digital identity is a key enabler for digital transformation within countries and poorer, and lots of discussions are going on multilaterally. So the key bits of our architecture, the trust framework, so that's been available for a couple of years on gov.uk. The third iteration, a beta iteration of this document, was published last June and has since been going through a robust series of tests, including some large in-person policy events to promote adoption across a wide range of economic sectors. We're doing a survey of our 300 regular stakeholders, the organisations that we talk to on a monthly basis, and we have a sandbox up and running. Then in the governance and certification stage, although we don't have legislation yet and our entire system isn't live, we're already operating digital identity verification for pre-employment, pre-rental and criminal records checks. So this is already happening under the certification framework, and the Office for Digital Identities and Attributes will be set up after legislation. That legislation is passing through the Houses of Parliament at the moment in about 15 measures that are part of the UK Data Protection and Digital Information Bill. So it's all happening in the UK. I will stop presenting now, and I am ready to talk, answer questions, whatever anybody wants.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for this insightful presentation on what's going on in the UK regarding digital identities. We have a question in the chat, and Vincent, if it's okay for you, I think you posted the question. I would ask the question if it's fine for you. Okay, then the question is, let me have a look again at the chat. I'm sorry. Does the UK have any government identity register at all to leverage? And if not, how can you verify identities?
So our system, we got feedback from industry that they felt they were best placed to set up the systems for verifying identities, but they recognised that the data that people trusted was still the data that is used by government to create people's passports and their driving licenses and their tax records. So we are not, because we have this commitment not to create a centralised database or a centralised system for verifying identities, the solution that we've come up with is that we will legislate to create an information gateway. So maybe I didn't explain this clearly enough, so that a private sector identity service provider that has been certified, that is listed on the secure public register that's going to be set up, and that has a trust mark, will be able to basically knock on a digital door of government and say, I have somebody in front of me, they say they are Caroline Copley, I have their digital identity document here, please can you confirm that this is indeed Caroline Copley? And that will go through a new set of digital pipes and a government department that has signed up to be part of this process will say yes or no. So the verification of the identity will still take place against trusted government data, government-held data, but government won't be doing the identity organising itself. So I've tried to explain that in a slightly different way. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, then there was directly a follow-up question from Vincent, which goes also in the direction of the question I would ask, how the UK views the development of an EU digital identity wallet and how does it impact you and your work?
Yes, so we are following the EU project with huge interest and respect, I must say. It's a true EU project in its scale of ambition. This ambition to make identities, digital identities, interoperable between all the member states. As somebody that now understands quite profoundly the challenges of interoperability, yes, I take my hats off to you and wish you well. So our project is, our programme is developing quite in parallel to that. We are watching very closely what you're doing whenever more information is available, for example, about the architecture and reference framework, the toolbox, the legislation, all those different elements that you are working through, then we benchmark that against the elements in our system so that when wider circumstances allow, the two parties can talk to each other and do some formal discussions about interoperability. But having said that, we have to accept that in the meantime, industry doesn't just operate on a country level. You know, a company like MasterCard just happens to be the first one that comes to my mind, obviously is everywhere, and they're already trying to rise to the challenges of how they do how they have systems in place that will work with digital identities from different countries. And this is very central to our thinking in the UK, that we have a lot to learn from industry, which is why we engage with them so intensely. And we listen to what they tell us they need government to do, and where they tell us to back off because they think that, you know, they've got the right solution. Well, we're happy with that, so long as we can test their ideas against our principles of privacy and inclusion and security. And what's been interesting actually over the last 3 years is that when we first started talking to industry, there was a very, very small number of things that they thought they couldn't problem solve on their own and they wanted government to do. And that list has grown over the last 3 years as they have realised the challenges themselves, the people that we talk to, these big companies, and that in the interests of avoiding market fragmentation, competition going the wrong way, privacy, security, inclusion issues, liability issues, you know, you name it, everything gets thrown into the mix when you're thinking about digital identities. That because we have that trusted conversation with industry, they keep saying, well, actually, it'd be really nice, British government, if for the British system, you know, you can sort this bit out. So the list of the things they want the government to do for the UK system is growing. So I might have gone a bit off topic there. I don't know if that clearly enough answers what we're doing.
I think so. Or someone from the audience?
Yeah, please feel free to chat.
Yes. Okay, I don't see a hand or hear a voice. Then the second half of the question from Jérôme, is the UK in any way involved in the eIDAS revision or the large-scale pilots, or do you just watch what the Europeans are doing?
Yeah, so I've mentioned how we're sort of doing a unilateral benchmarking exercise. Quite a lot of our industry stakeholders have some link with one or other of the pilots. We have a link into the EWC, the EU Wallet Consortium pilot, which I think is led by Sweden and Norway. So we're following that one with particular interest. It seems particularly relevant to interoperability. We welcome opportunities to engage with other pilots as well, noting though that we're not in the EU. We don't want to muscle our way in. It's just about being practically involved and being able to share observations about how things might work or not work. So that's the approach we're taking. On eIDAS, just to note that in Europe, you're bundling everything up together. So your digital identity wallet is an extension of the existing eIDAS regulations for reasons too complicated to go into, but it's no big deal. In the UK, they're actually two separate streams. So we inherited the fantastic eIDAS system for trust services, electronic signatures, and so on. And when we left the EU, we imported that into our domestic legislation. So we have that system, UK eIDAS, up and running. And we use EU conformity assessment bodies for as part of that process. Our digital identity program is operating under separate legislation and a separate program.
Okay, thank you very much. With the next question, I would leave the European continent and go to the Commonwealth. There's a question: how are there any conversations with other Commonwealth countries, including Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and also with the US, to do the digital identity interoperable, or how do you work here?
Yeah, we work really closely with all of those countries. It's been fantastic to have those relationships because Australia, New Zealand, well, they're all in a way at the same stage as us, a little bit further ahead in one way, a little bit further behind in another way. We have discussions about trust and inclusion are very important, as well as just the practicalities. So we do value those relationships alongside learning from what the EU is doing. So I think those Commonwealth countries and observing the EU are where we're doing most of our learning and developing internationally.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question from Haluk: does the UK has any plans to introduce a self-sovereign identity-like structure in the future?
So as I said in my presentation, the UK is technology agnostic in its approach. So self-sovereign identity is just one solution, and it is entirely acceptable under the trust framework. The trust framework doesn't rule out very much, as I again tried to underline. It just makes sure that everything is safe and secure and inclusive. For example, on biometrics, we don't insist in the trust framework that solutions have to follow certain biometric standards. We say what will be good biometric standards for those organisations that want to use biometrics, but we say that there must be other options as well for when the biometrics fail. So it just gives you an example of how we're approaching the matter. It's interesting that Scotland, we are a nation of devolved nations as well. So Scotland has its own digital identity programme. And for that, they're going down the self-sovereign identity route, which is very interesting. We have lots of conversations with them as we create an ecosystem that will work across all four of the devolved nations.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it answers the question. One last question. It's a longer one, but I would ask you to keep a short answer due to our time. Andras states that he very much like government non-interference with business, who are up to challenge to offer identity services. And he asks, is there any discussion around possible business models when it comes to offering identity provision services? Is it up to service providers to find the business opportunity?
Our experience is that identity service providers have already found the business opportunity. So the companies that have asked to be certified and got certified already in our trusted ecosystem are a mixture of organizations that are specifically digital identity service providers, and then bigger organizations where they see that digital identity provision is a useful add-on. Maybe they're a large employer and they think, well, they'll build their own digital identity service provision into their own business model rather than having to buy it in. Banks are very excited by digital identity, not just for how it can be used with consumers, but business to business, and also for recruitment. So hopefully I've answered that question there.
I think so. And with it, we are totally on time. Thank you, Caroline, for your interesting presentation. And of course, thank you, dear audience, for all the questions and comments. And I think Caroline will remain open for questions and comments. And of course, we will hear a lot about the UK's digital identity strategy in the future.